McDonald's just published its 10K annual report, and it is 83 pages long and over 60,000 words in it. In this video, I'm going to cut through all that fluff and pick out the main facts and metrics that really matter to investors. Hey, if you're new here, my name is Dimitri, and I have researched and analyzed stocks professionally for over a decade. And today I'm diving into one of my favorites, McDonald's, to show you how I pick out what really matters to investors. So let's dive right in. Okay, before we jump into the business, let's take a look at what's going on with the stock. Shares are flat essentially over the last 52 weeks. The lowest price you could buy the stock for was about $285 back in June. The 52-week high came just a few weeks ago, right before this annual report came out, February 27th, and at $341 a share. So the broader market is up about 13% in the past year, and McDonald's is roughly flat. So it is underperforming the market slightly. And let's take a look at the 10K report. This is for the full fiscal year that ended in December of 2025, and this came out in late February of 2026. And I'm starting with the general business summary, and this is more of the qualitative stuff before we dive into some of the metrics. Management says the company franchises and owns and operates McDonald's restaurants, which serve a locally relevant menu of quality food and beverages in more than 100 countries. So there's 45,000 restaurants around the world, and more than 95% of them were franchised. So that tells us it's a very global business, operating in more than 100 countries. And so that puts it up there with something like Coca-Cola that is served in just about every country in the world. The company is primarily a franchisor, so that's basically what the first thing you want to know about this business is. McDonald's doesn't really make money on selling products. It makes money on franchise fees, franchise revenue, and rental fees and rental revenue. The company's revenues, it says here, consist of fees from franchised restaurants operated by conventional franchisees, developmental licenses, and affiliates. So that's mainly what its sales come from, as a percentage of sales that the franchisors have to pay in fees. Conventional franchise agreement mentions here the company generally owns or secures a long-term lease on the land and the building for the restaurant location, and the franchisee pays for equipment, signs, seating, and decor. So in that way, McDonald's owns an amazing amount of real estate, and that's what the company says here. McDonald's management believes that the ownership of real estate combined with the co-investment by franchisees enable it to achieve restaurant performance levels that are among the highest in the industry. And we're going to see that in a minute. Basically, that profit margin is where that's going to show up. Scrolling down to some of the products that they mention, McDonald's menu features hamburgers and cheeseburgers. So the Big Macs, if they're mentioned here, these are multi-billion-dollar annual product, and you can think of them as like platforms in some cases. So the Big Mac, the quarter pounder with cheese, the Filet-O-Fish, several chicken sandwiches. So it's got a chicken platform you can think of. And management is trying to push more into that because chicken is plentifully available. And so right now they've got McChicken, McCrispy, and McSpicy, as well as Chicken McNuggets, and obviously the fries. McDonald's is the biggest consumer of potatoes in the world, and that French fries business is massive when you think about it globally. McDonald's restaurants in the U.S. also offer a full or limited breakfast menu that puts it in competition with some cafes like Starbucks. Breakfast offerings may include sandwiches like the Egg McMuffin, Sausage McMuffin, Egg, and McGriddle. So huge platforms both in lunch and in the breakfast category. Scrolling down here, some of the metrics that describe the 2025 year. Global comparable sales increased 3.1%. So that's, you sometimes see analysts calling that comps or same store sales. So this is how much the average restaurant did compared to a year ago. Sales were up 3% globally. In the US market, which is its biggest market, sales were up 2%, so a little bit slower than the global revenue market. And they mention here that it benefited from average check growth. So comparable store sales can grow by two different ways. Usually you want to see both customer traffic and average check growth. So in this case, McDonald's is not highlighting customer traffic. So I think customer traffic was down slightly. But average spending was up, so that helped the overall comparable store sales increase, even though there were slightly fewer customers dining at the restaurants. Consolidated revenue, so overall, grew by 4% to $27 billion, and operating income grew slightly faster at a 6% rate to $12.4 billion. And if you look at that, just $12.4 billion over 26, it's almost half of the sales is turned into operating profit margin, and that's why we see here operating margin increased to 45%. So almost 50% of sales in operating profit, and it's increasing. So getting closer to that 50% mark, which is just unbelievably elite for this industry and almost any other industry. Operating cash flow is also significant here. Cash from operations grew by 12% to 10.6 billion. Free cash flow, significant as well, grew by 8% to 7.2 billion. And all these figures, all these cash flow figures and profit figures are growing faster than overall revenue. So that tells me that McDonald's is super efficient and getting more efficient as we go. The outlook, management doesn't predict exactly where sales are going to go, but they do say that operating profit margin is expected to be in the mid to high 40% range. That's similar to what we've seen over the last 3 years. We've had 3 straight years of over 45% operating profit margin, and management is predicting basically the same thing. And they predict that cash flow, the free cash flow conversion rate will be in the mid 80% range, meaning the percentage earnings is going to be converted into free cash flow at about an 80% rate. McDonald's is almost entirely franchised here. We can see 95% of restaurants are owned by franchisees, so only 5% are owned by McDonald's itself. The company's heavily franchised business model is designed to generate stable and predictable revenue, which is largely a function of franchisee sales and resulting free cash flow streams. We can see that here. So sales growth was at the typical franchisee was up about 6% in 2025 compared to a 2% increase in 2024. Solid acceleration, and that's mainly because, as we said, people are spending a little bit more when they go into the restaurants. Here we can see the operating profit margin calculation, and I just highlighted how in 2023 operating profit margin was 45.7% of sales. It declined slightly in 2024 when sales growth did slow, as we saw earlier, from about 4% to 2%. But sales growth accelerated in 2025 to about a 6% rate, and they were able to convert that into an over 46% profit margin. So that tells us if sales continue to accelerate a little bit in 2026, we might see operating profit margin approach that 50% rate. Finally, looking at cash flows, cash provided by operations were $10.6 billion, an increase of $1.1 billion, so more than 10%. And free cash flow was $7.2 billion, a slight decrease from $510 billion to 8%. The company gets growth through increased comps, but also by opening new restaurants. So on top of that 45,000 or so stores that are operating globally, the company opens around 2,200 a year, and they did open 2,276 in the 2025 year and closed 396. So net, they opened around 2,200, around 2,000 restaurants, which is similar to what they did last year. Actually, it's a little bit faster, and that's a major tailwind for the business. And how is management spending that cash? You can see that dividends are increasing solidly every year. The company is spending a little bit on what they call treasury stock purchases, which is buying back stock. Spent $3 billion on stock repurchases in 2023, $2.8 billion in 2024, and $2 billion last year. But as those figures decline, you could see that the company is spending more on dividends. It spent $4.5 billion on dividends 2 years ago, $4.9 billion in 2024, and $5.1 billion in 2025. And as the company mentions, McDonald's has paid dividends on its common stock for 50 consecutive years and has increased the dividend amount every year. That makes it a dividend king. And the dividend has more than doubled. 10 years ago, it was something like $3.50 a share, and now it's up to $7 a share. So that's my full analysis on McDonald's. Let me know in the comment section below if you'd like me to dive into another stock and which stock you want to see analyzed next.